So, you've told the story, I think maybe 10 million times about Ted Turner giving you 2 hours in prime time. You're going to get it. Talk to us a little bit about the idea of the name Nitro, why it was going to be called that, what the look was going to be. I know you said that you got Lex Luger on a bargain, but how important that was to get him in the first episode.
That's a great question. Actually, I don't get that one too often. Kudos to you. But let's start out with Lex Luger first. Now, we'll start out with where the Nitro name came from first. I had a meeting with Ted Turner scheduled, and I had that meeting scheduled for probably a month or two in advance. And I asked for the meeting specifically because I wanted Ted's permission to do an international television deal with a television network called Star TV. Star TV was a Chinese television cable satellite outlet, but it was owned by Rupert Murdoch. And unless you're kind of in the broadcast industry or a student of the history of that, you might not appreciate the fact that Rupert Murdoch announced that he was going to start a 24-hour news channel on the heels of Ted Turner creating CNN. So now there's this direct competition between Rupert Murdoch and Ted Turner. And Ted was a very competitive person. So I knew that if I was going to do a deal with a company that was owned by Rupert Murdoch, I had to get Ted's permission to do it. And it was important at that time because WCW was right on the verge of making a profit for the first time in WCW's history. That was always when I first came to work at WCW, that was like a fantasy. Nobody ever thought it would really make money. Everybody thought that, Ted Turner will just keep putting wrestling on because it gets viewers, without any understanding of how the math worked, right? So it was this misconception that, no matter what happens, Ted Turner's always going to have wrestling. But that changed. And I was told in no uncertain terms that Ted wanted WCW to make a profit. So I went to work. I worked very hard. I cut back on expenses. I cut back on travel. I did a lot of things. I cut back on live events because they were losing money. I did a lot of things to reduce our expenses while trying to figure out how to make more profit. It's kind of simple math, right? It's business 101. So in that process, the opportunity came along to distribute our WCW shows on Star TV over in China. But again, it was owned by Rupert. So I spent a month rehearsing my meeting. I was a salesman a long time before I ever got involved in professional wrestling. So I was working on my pitch. I was anticipating his objections. I was doing all the things a good used car salesman would do. And finally got my meeting. Harvey Schiller, my boss at the time, set the meeting up for me because I wasn't, I didn't report directly to Ted. I had to go through my boss to get that meeting. And I sat down with Ted and I had my pitch. I was so ready. I could have sold ice to Eskimos at that point. I was ready for every objection. And I was nervous because I had never sat across the table from Ted Turner to negotiate or discuss business. The only time I had met Ted Turner was at a party or at a corporate function with 3,500 other people. So now it's just me and Ted, really. Harvey Schiller was to my right. Scott Sasso was there. He was the president of the network. So it's like, okay, small talk's over. Eric, what are you here to talk about? Yeah. Here we go. Strap in, Ted. I got about a minute and a half. And Ted says, wait a minute. I can't do a good Ted Turner impersonation, but I'm going to try my best. So, Eric, tell me, what do we got to do to compete with WWF? It was called WWF at the time. I prepared for every question, every objection, I could have tied him in a knot if he would have asked me anything other than, what do we have to do to compete with Vince McMahon? Hadn't thought about that. So I did what any street fighter would do, as I tucked my chin, put my hands up, I backed myself into a corner, and I went, now what do I do? I just didn't want to get knocked out until I figured it out. And I thought, okay, well, the best thing to do is to just tell the truth, because I couldn't think of a good lie. I'm not going to try to Ted Turner. So I'm just going to tell him the truth. I said, well, Ted, here's the reality. WWE is on prime time every Monday night. That's their number one show. It's on prime time every Monday night. Our number one show is on Saturday night at 6:05 Eastern, 3:05 Pacific time. So on the East Coast of the United States, it was on at 6:05 in the evening on a Saturday night when nobody's watching television. And it gets worse because on the West Coast, it's on at 3:05 in the afternoon where even fewer people are watching television. And I said, Ted, there's no way we can compete. He's got prime time. We have Saturday night. It's not going to work. 2, 3, 4, pause, right? Nothing said. Ted looks over to Scott Sassa. Scott Sassa at the time was like the heir apparent to Ted Turner, a young guy, very, very brilliant cat, really liked Scott. But he was like the number 2 guy at the time. He was in charge of TNT and TBS. Ted looks over to Scott and says, Scott, give her 2 hours every night on Monday night. Go head-to-head with WWE. I went, came here to sell China. I didn't come here to pick a fight with Vince McMahon. I don't even know how to fight that fight. No, Ted, no. If we do this deal with Rupert Murdoch, we're going to be in profit for the first time. That was my mandate when I got the job as executive vice president. That was my job, is to turn a profit. And here I have a deal sitting in my hand that would have put us in profit. I didn't get 60 seconds into that pitch before I got shut down. And I found out that now I've got a primetime show going head-to-head against Monday Night Raw. Never thought about it, never wanted it, never dreamed about it. I'd have punched him in the face if he would have suggested it was a good idea. But here I got Ted Turner telling me that's what we're going to do. So that's how that started.
And how do you come up with the name Nitro? How do you...
I'm sorry, I forgot. So Brad Siegel... Scott Sassa was Brad Siegel's boss. So it went Ted Turner, Scott Sassa, Brad Siegel. Brad Siegel was in charge of the TNT network. Brad Siegel wasn't even in the meeting. He didn't get invited. If you think I was surprised that we had a Monday night primetime show on TNT network, he should have been Brad Siegel. If a was playing golf somewhere at a corporate event and he came back and found out he's got wrestling on his movie network on Monday nights. But to Brad's credit, he didn't have a choice. He didn't get to vote. All he could do is what any really good executive or good employee does, is you just do what your boss tells you you're supposed to do, right? And Brad had a very good attitude about it. And it was Brad Siegel, really, who said, and he didn't tell me I had to because it was my choice, but he strongly suggested that we call the show Monday Nitro because at that time, the TNT network had what's called a block. It was called an action block on Tuesday nights. It was called Tuesday Night Nitro. And it was all Arnold Schwarzenegger, Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee, action, Rambo, testosterone-fueled television block from like 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night. And it was called Tuesday Night Nitro. And Brad, being a very smart guy, said, please think about calling it Monday Nitro because the audience is kind of the same. We already have a brand for our network. People are already familiar with it. They understand what Nitro means on Tuesday nights. It would be a good name. And I went, done, simple, makes sense. So it was Brad Siegel's idea, really not mine.
And then, you've talked about before getting Lex Luger, you didn't really want him. You got him on a good deal. But how important was it on that first episode to have him walk out, who was in, as far as everyone else knew, in WWF?
Everybody in WWF thought that Lex Luger was under contract to the WWF. That's why that's so much fun. I love telling the story. But as many of you probably know, Lex Luger worked at WCW for a number of years while when I first showed up. I was an announcer. I was like the C Squad, third string announcer. I did all the stuff that Tony Schiavone and Jim Ross didn't have time to do or didn't want to do, quite honestly. And I was grateful for that because at the time I needed that job really, really bad. And I was so comfortable in that role. But during that period of time, I wasn't a threat to anybody. I was just like a potted plant in the corner of the room. Everybody acknowledged it, but it didn't matter, really. It was kind of like a fake plant. It wasn't even a real plant. You didn't have to water it. You just go, oh, yeah, it's a good-looking fake plant. So I got to work with a lot of the talent, but again, in a very non-threatening way. And I was kind of like a fly on the wall in that role because I wasn't threatening. Nobody acted a certain way around me. Nobody really cared that I was there. So I got to kind of like just watch people and how they worked and how they treated other people and how talented they were or how talented they thought they were. I just got to observe a lot. And Lex was someone that I observed because he was featured very prominently in WCW at that time. And I just thought he was a dick. He was arrogant. He was full of himself. He really treated people pretty badly. He always had this, like I never saw, anytime you saw Lex walk around, it was always like this. You go, hey, Kenny, how are you? Hope you're having a good day. You know, he'd never make eye contact. His nose was always up in the air. Literally and figuratively talking down to people. He was that arrogant. And it's not that I disliked him, but I just didn't want to be around him. He's not the kind of person I want to spend any extra time with. If I had to work with him, I would, but it was like as soon as I was done, I'd go find something else to do away. And then Lex left and he went to WWF. And I was thrilled because I thought he was a dick. Couldn't care less about him. He floundered there with the Lex Express and all that silly shit he did. It didn't really work very well. And around the time that the Lex Express was beginning, the wheels were beginning to fall off the bus. I had been promoted, and I'd always had a pretty good relationship with Sting, Steve Borden. Sting and Lex were business partners. They owned a gym together, and they were very, very close friends. And I was pretty close to Sting. And Sting came to me one day, and he said, now this is right before, literally 6 weeks before Nitro. I already knew I was going to have to do this show. I was trying to figure out what the show was going to look like, what it was going to feel like, how it was going to be different than WWF or WWE at the time, Monday Night Raw. So I was working through the creative process in my head. And part of that creative process, I got to stand up, guys. I can't stand sitting down. I'm sorry. Part of that creative process was doing a lot of research. Brad Siegel, again, to his credit, hired a third party, an outside research group to do focus groups all over the United States. So we get like 25 wrestling fans, 8 of them hardcore WWE fans, 8 of them hardcore WCW fans, 4 of them didn't really give a f***. Every once in a while they'd watch wrestling. They didn't care which one they watched. 4 of them were ex-wrestling fans. They used to watch wrestling, but they don't want to watch it anymore. So it was a very specific focus group. And it was really brilliant, actually. I learned a lot in that process. And we did these focus groups. There'd be like, I'm using numbers that we can understand here, but sometimes there'd be 25, sometimes there'd be 50, but they'd always be broken down evenly as the way I just described. And I was sitting behind a mirror So the focus group was looking, they saw a mirror, but I was actually able to look at them. They couldn't see me, but I could see them. And the moderators in that focus group would ask very specific questions. And there's really great research and there's really horrible research. And the really great research is invaluable. So there would be a list of questions in these focus groups, and you'd go through it. And some of it was, for example, I won't go through all of it, but some of it was like, why do you watch professional wrestling? What is it about professional wrestling that makes you want to continue to watch it? Or what was it about professional wrestling that you used to enjoy, but you don't enjoy any longer? What is it you enjoy about the WWE product over WCW? And what is it about the WCW product that you love more or enjoy more than WWE? So you get this cross-section of responses. And at the end of it, there would be an analysis. And the one thing that was consistent across the board, and we did these focus groups in Chicago, in Boston, Nashville, Minneapolis, Chicago, Denver, Portland, Oregon, San Antonio, Texas. We did them all over the country because every market's a little bit different. I don't know what it's like here in Ireland or what it's like in other countries, but depending on certain markets, people enjoy certain aspects of professional wrestling more or less than others. The one consistent theme that came across loud and clear was people loved wrestling because there's always that opportunity for a surprise. People love to be surprised. They love to see something happen that they didn't see coming. And I heard that over and over and over again. And I went, okay, one of the things that we have to do with Nitro is to fulfill that and to satisfy that aspect of what everybody likes. No matter where you live in the United States, that's what they loved. So right around that time, Steve Borden pulls me aside. He goes, hey, I know you don't really think too much of Lex, but he'd like to know if you'd be interested in perhaps bringing him back to WCW. Now, if Sting would have come to me 4 months earlier with that question, even though we were friends, I would have said, F off. But I'm thinking, wow, that could be that surprise because Lex was getting this major push in WWE, like major push. They put him in a bus. They toured him across the country like some kind of freaking rock star. I'm thinking, that could be really cool. But I said, Steve, here's how this is going to work. I'll sit down and talk to Lex, but it has to stay absolutely quiet. Nobody can know. Not his wife, not his kids, not his attorney, not his agent. No one knows, because if this leaks that I'm even talking to Lex, you know what the answer is going to be. So Lex agreed, Sting agreed, and we had like 3 or 4 meetings. All of them were in Sting's garage at the time. Sting lived outside of Atlanta, and he had a really nice big house, and he had a garage, but he had like an in-law apartment up above the garage. Had a kitchen in it, and it was a living room, and it was really nice. We had our meetings up in that room because we didn't want Sting's kids to see us talking for fear that it might leak out. They were like little kids at the time, so we didn't want any risk. So we conducted all of our meetings in secret in the garage of Steve Borden's house. And I thought, wow, this would be pretty cool. And Lex, to his credit, and Lex and I are pretty good friends to this day. He's one of the people that I've learned to have he found his faith. He's really turned himself around, and he's suffered some hard times in some respects, but he's a better, happier person than he's probably ever been in his life, believe it or not. But at that time, I wasn't quite sure. But Lex kept his word. He flew himself into Minneapolis for the very first Nitro. I didn't even want to book him through our travel department because there was a chance if somebody saw Larry Foll, it's his real name, his name on a travel document, then, it's going to get out, right? So I said, Lex, fly yourself into Minneapolis, stay at a hotel away from everybody else. Don't stay with the talent. Don't stay with anybody at WCW. find your way over to the building, just be there on time. And he showed up. And the funny part is, years later, I'm working for WWE, and one of my best friends to this day is Bruce Pritchard, who is a producer at WWE. And he was hot. He was so pissed off that we pulled that off because nobody knew. WWE, Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson, and I think Bruce was over in, I think they were in the UK. They might have been in Germany. They had a tour overseas. They thought Lex was still under contract. So they were get up in the morning and they're getting phone calls going, did you see Lex Luger in WCW? Well, that can't happen. He's under contract. Well, he wasn't. They fell asleep at the wheel. His contract had expired 48 hours earlier, but because we were able to keep it a secret, they didn't even know his contract had expired until they found out he was on my show. And that element of surprise, when Lex Luger showed up, the reason I'm so proud of that moment, and in the big scheme of things, it probably seems like an insignificant moment, but the reason I'm so excited about that moment, even to this day, is because it absolutely checked that box about surprising. Now, I not only surprised the wrestling audience, I surprised the out of WWE. And when you can surprise everybody, you win. And that's how that came down.